The other day, an old friend sent me a suggestion that I should have considered a long time ago. Back in the day, he was, just as I, a mechanic, and thought it would be fun to recount some of the interesting challenges we as mechanics often came up against. Well, to a certain degree, this was an excellent idea, except a lot of mechanic jargon and other mechanical stuff are very interesting to mechanics, and not necessarily to anyone else. I could write volumes about my adventures turning wrenches, twisting screwdrivers, torquing head bolts, setting valve gaps and point gaps, splitting tractors, pulling clutches, and striking an arc on whatever needed welding. Then I could write even more about my adventures on the road, climbing silos, pulling well pumps, and diving into manure pits. Yeah, you heard that right, manure pits. Diving into them. Trouble is, many of you would have absolutely no clue as to what I was talking about and therefore not be interested, not impressed, and most of all, not inspired. There's not that many of you out there following me, and I can't afford to lose any of you, so I have to keep it interesting, lively, and relative even for the least mechanical among you. Well, maybe the manure pit thing would tickle somebody's fancy. Anyway, let me tell you what I'm gonna do. My career as a mechanic and Agway Farm Service Technician, that was actually my official title for a while, wasn't all about tools and technical stuff. It was about situations. Situations where someone had a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or structural problem, and I got the call to go solve it. I am sure most, if not all of you, at one time or another, found yourselves in such a situation and had to call someone like me to fix your problem. Well, skirting and dancing around the technical stuff, I'm going to tell about some of those situations I came across over the years from the viewpoint of the guy stuck with the task of doing the fixing. At no time was any of these situations the same. They ranged from simple to difficult, comical to aggravating, and mundane to downright scary. Now, where in hell do I start? I've been doing this stuff for 50 years. No, the manure pit will have to wait. I'll save that for a rainy day. I think I'll start with silos. Yes, silos, those tall, cylindrical structures you see scattered around farming landscapes wherever silos are needed. They put silage in them. Silage, you may ask? That's chopped corn stalks or chopped sorghum or chopped grass of some sort. Nutrient-filled livestock feed, in case you didn't know. Back in the old days, unfortunately not old enough days to be before my time, to get the silage out of silos required one to climb up inside and fork the silage out by hand. One of my jobs as a farm kid was to do just that, at least once a day. On hot days, it was brutally hot work. In the worst of winter, it was equally brutal, but a lot colder, and very physical for a farm kid. By the mid-60s and beyond, electromechanical silo unloaders were the way to do it. Agway sold them, and it became my job to install them, and my job to repair them when they broke down or wore out. Fortunately for me and my severe acrophobia, yes, you can Google that, most silos in the area I worked were no more than 50 or 60 feet in height. That wasn't too much for me to handle, as long as I could climb up inside an enclosed chute, and as long as I could work inside the silo. Under those conditions, my heart rate could keep down to a sustainable level. Another fortunate factor in my silo unloader career was that it lasted a short time, from early December 1980 to the end of August 1983. The reason I remember that so precisely is because of what coincided with my silo unloader adventures on those dates. Let me try to explain. First of all, for those of you who have no idea what a silo unloader does or what one looks like, I will attempt to describe one. Those of you who do know, please try not to laugh. An electromechanical silo unloader is a contraption that sits on the top of a pile of silage inside a silo. It has augers and rotors and fingers that work together to scrape and dig and gather silage to its center, where a blower picks it up, throws it out through a gooseneck-shaped chute, out the silo door, and down the silo chute to whatever contraption is waiting below to bring it to the waiting mouths of hungry livestock. If you're still wanting for a better visualization, well, you can Google that. If I was lucky, the installation was in a new, empty silo. That meant that the installation was inside the silo, at ground level. That was a piece of cake. Didn't have to lug tools and parts to the top, didn't have to deal with heights. Unfortunately, more often than not, the silo was full by the time the farmer bought the unloader. That meant a crane had to be brought in to hoist all the unloader's parts to the top of the silo. That, to my personal terror, meant I had to get up there and hang out the top of the silo to pull all those parts inside. Never a fun experience. The actual installation wasn't all that bad. It was sort of like putting together a large erector set from back in my days of being a kid in the 50s. What's an erector set? You can Google that too. Now, my first time at installing a silo unloader, of all places, happened to be at the farm of the Wallkill Correctional Facility in Ulster County, just north of the village of Wallkill, New York. Yep, that was early December 1980, the beginning of the Christmas season, exactly 2 years into my career as a farm service technician. In spite of this particular installation being my first time at bat, excuse the poor choice of metaphor, and in spite of where it was a most unremarkable and unrememberable experience. Since it was my first time, I had help from 2 experienced technicians. The job went smoothly and quickly, and to be honest, there is little of anything interesting to tell about it, except the weather was typical of that time in the Mid-Hudson Valley. It was cold, raw, overcast. On and off snow turned into rain. Keep snow turned into rain in the back of your head. As we were finishing up the job after working all day in this miserable weather, there was an elderly inmate sitting on one of the empty crates the silo unloader came in. He was watching us with a big smile and singing a happy song. One of my co-workers had to ask him why he was in such a cheerful mood, singing that happy song on such a miserable day while being in prison. With a bold chuckle, he slapped his knee and replied, "I've been in this godforsaken place for 30 years. Tomorrow, I'm going home." I'll never forget that old man's joy, in spite of the time, the weather, and the place. His indomitable humanity will forever keep that day in my memory. The exact time in history, however, was forged in my memory by the late Dan Fogelberg, a musician and songwriter popular at that time. His song, Same Old Lang Syne, was just hitting the airwaves, and during that installation was the first time I heard it. If you ever heard that song, you would be familiar with the bittersweet story it tells about 2 former lovers and their chance meeting around Christmas time. Somehow the mood of that song perfectly matched the emotional and physical atmosphere during that job. Its final lyrics, most poignantly, tied together that song and everything I experienced that day as the snow turned into rain. Over the next 3 years, there were about a dozen more installations. Sometimes I had help, sometimes not. It didn't matter. I became good at it. It became routine. However, once in a while, I'd get thrown a bit of a curve. Case in point, my last ever silo unloader installation. It was on a farm up in Lake Katrine, New York. That farmer, a congenial old New York City Italian fellow, asked me to do him a favor. How could I refuse? The silo was full, so the work had to be done at the top, and this silo was 60 feet tall, the tallest silo I'd ever worked on. Not a big deal in silos that can rise 80 feet or more, but for somebody with my particular phobia, it was still slightly beyond the edge of my envelope. When the silo was built, the fill door on the roof was installed at the wrong angle. That was the door the filler pipe or blower pipe went in. Where it was located, the blower, that was the name of the contraption that blows the silage into the silo, couldn't be positioned properly. The favor I was requested to perform was to cut out a panel of the roof at a better location to allow the correct positioning of that blower pipe. It was a simple enough task. All I had to do was cut away the clamps that held the roof panel in place and push the panel away. Much easier said than done. The assembly of the unloader went fast and without the slightest complications. The silo door was closed. I could not see outside. There was no sense of being off the ground. No problem. Before the crane left, I had a small, portable oxyacetylene cutting torch lifted into the silo. Once the unloader installation was complete, I selected a roof panel at the desired position, lit the torch, adjusted the flame, and cut the clamps. I gave the now liberated roof panel a stiff push, and it fell away just as planned. Good job, except suddenly, there I stood at the very top of the silo with nothing between me and the ground, 60 feet down. I was quite healthy in those days, pulse always around mid-60s, blood pressure never far from 120/80, until that moment when my pulse doubled and my blood pressure boiled over. You see, my brain instantly realized I had been fooling it into the false sense of being safely on the ground. I quickly dropped to my knees and scrambled to the center of the silo in a cold sweat. I thank God and the deteriorating fortunes of Agway that was my last silo unloader installation. That day was Thursday, August 25th, 1983. A typical late summer, hot and humid Hudson Valley afternoon. How do I remember it was that day? There were no cell phones back then, so I couldn't be reached. It wasn't until early evening when I returned home that I got the news. Muriel Cimarelli, my mother-in-law, passed away. Funny how that works. So many mileposts in your life. Some you fly by without ever noticing. Some are forgotten the very moment they pass from your sight. Others, like moments of sheer terror or the loss of a loved one, stay branded on your soul for a lifetime. And then, I thank Providence, there are those simple, quiet little moments, born from a bittersweet love song and a joyful old prisoner singing away his sorrows as the snow turned into rain.